I grew up with friends all around me. Next door neighbor were the Brysons. Mr. Bryson was a U.S. House representative, and it was after my father died, and Lipscomb Russell Company was supposed to support us, but that somebody got it away from the family, and so Mother needed a job, and she saw Mr. Bryson walking up the street, and he had run against Haywood Mahan for something in Greenville, and Mother walked out and said, "Joe, I didn't vote for you, but I need a job." And he said, "Well, as of tomorrow morning, you'll have a job." And she went to work for OPA, that's the Office of Price Administration, and from there to the Social Security Board, where she retired at age 70, I think, or way past where she should have. But she was tough. She never, ever said to us, "I don't have the money. You can't do this, you can't do that." Mother went to Greenville Women's College, and at Furman University now. And she majored in piano. And she got to the concert stage and met my father, married him, and so the piano business was over. She said she never liked it, but that her mother wanted her to take piano because it would be a way of a woman to make a living if she had to. So she gave up the piano, but the concert sort of thing, and I can't remember ever hearing her play again. We had a piano, and it was downstairs at the house, and every now and then the children would bang on it or something like that. But she was an amazing person because doing that, she concentrated on the children and my father, who wasn't in good health, but got worse and worse and worse. And she knew she probably would have to make a living, so she went to Drone's Business School after my father died. Anyway, she was a strong, amazing person. I rarely saw Mother. I mean, she tended to Daddy, but it was in her mind, and she came from a family that probably far ahead of cleanliness, and she was not ever going to let us catch it, and she didn't. I remember going out the driveway and looking through the window of the big bedroom that they had there, and I knocked on the window, so my father, lying in the bed, looked up at me, and he raised his hand to tell me to go away, and it was just bones. But I'll never forget that Emma came up to my room in 1936, and they called me Baby. Everybody called me Baby. And she says, "Baby, your daddy died." And so that was kind of like, I just took it. And of course, I'm sure I was sad, and later it really hit me and so forth. But Emma ended up so stable and there with Mother as long as Mother could pay her. And even when Mother couldn't pay her and she worked for other people, she would come over to visit and bring little patent leather shoes for me that she had bought. And Mother said, "Emma, you can't buy clothes for Mary Gladys. You can't do that. You can't do that." She came to work for my mother when Mother and Daddy lived up on Hampton Avenue, and her family had told her she had to leave because she had a baby, and they couldn't feed her. She came from Pelza, and so she ended up on Hampton Avenue working for Mother. And when my mother and father bought a house over on Bennett Street, where the Musua, Leroy Richardson, lives now. And I was born in 1925, and I think I could have been the first one that was born there. Jim was 1923, and John, my brother, was 1921. Margaret was 1926. My two brothers, John and Jim. Jim was 2 years older, and John was 4 years older. When he was 15, he decided that Mother didn't need to feed him, so he joined the Navy. And through a lot of back and forth stuff, he ended up graduating from Harvard. And I was very proud to know that, and I liked his wife. Anyway, they ended up in Ohio, and he went to work for Ford there with all of his brilliance. He went to work at the night shift because his snoring kept her awake. And that is the truth. And then Jim, my other brother, moved to High Point and married a prominent girl there who had ends into textile, and Mr. Wren Hosiery, hired Jim, and he worked there for years, but he would come home every now and then, and he just wasn't happy, but he took his life. It was just not time for the medication that helps schizophrenia and mental illness. Of course, I'm very close to that, and I see what miracles can happen when a patient that has this has access to it. I went to Stone School in the 6th grade, and I'll never forget the principal. He was an amazing person. I remember when my father died, I went to class, and he said, "Now, students, I want you to know that Gladys has had a hard time, and be especially nice to her today." He was kind of a funny-looking little man, tall but very kind, very kind. And I made friendships with Daisy Bell Anderson there. And Daisy Bell and I ended up to be really good friends, and I'd go to Greensboro and visit with her. And her mother was a beautiful woman, but just sort of, she was just on the edge of everything, you know. But we went to Greenville High, 9th grade, and graduated 11th grade. Frequently, I walked from Bennett Street all the way over to Greenville High. And it goes to say I was late a lot. It didn't matter too much back then, I don't think. But I loved math, and the math teacher, Miss Sarah Meredith, would, they called her six-pack because she liked a beer during the mornings, and she would frequently say, "Well, Gladys, you take over." So I'd teach the class till she wanted to come back, and I loved it. It really was, math was so fascinating. And then they had this voting thing for a beauty queen. Well, I had no idea because Mother never said I was pretty or anything. She said Margaret was beautiful, but my mouth was too big. I kept asking Mother who was the prettiest. Who's the prettiest? Margaret or me? Margaret or me? On and on and on. And finally she said, Mary Gladys, your mouth's too big. I didn't ask anymore. I might have gotten another true answer. So I just took that as just not being too good looking. And I was surprised when they voted that I should be voted on again with maybe 6 other girls or something for Beauty Queen for the yearbook. Well, so I was chosen along with 1 or 2 others, I think. And you had to have a picture so they could send it off to the John Powers modeling agency in New York City so he could choose. Well, I had to have a picture, so I went to this photographer who later became really wonderful and famous, Mills Steele here in Greenville. And he would take a glossy of me for $1. So I paid him $1 and I got my glossy and it was entered and they liked it, so it was chosen. And then when went to dances at Clemson, and they had voting on girls there, and I was dating this boy, but he double crossed me, so I took my picture back and gave it to Jack Carter, who lived in Charleston. And Jack took the picture and entered it in the contest at Clemson. So it won, and then it was in Clemson. And then before I could think too much about it, Mill Stills took the picture to California for some seminar on photography and won something with it, but the idea of the photograph was the shadows, and it made, things stand out, hair and brow, all of that. So he won that, and that was good. I remember walking from my house down to the Rivoli Theater to go to a movie. And these 2 boys, Sammy Turntine and Rodney Piper, were my dates. And as we got there, each one of them gave me a nickel so I could buy my ticket. But I had to have a chaperone. Jim, my brother Jim, had to go with us. And Rodney Piper's brother, I think his name was Sammy or something like that. But we all went to the Rivoli and saw cowboy pictures. It was, walking downtown. Well, I think I had scarlet fever, and back then you quarantine. So my father called to me and told me to come top of the steps. He had something that he wanted to show me. So I got there, and he had this beautiful little pink baby. That was Libby. I was a little over 10, so I've always been 10 years older than Libby. That was 1935, and my father died in 1936. And Mother, of course, was always there for him through all of this tuberculosis thing that there was no cure or anything for. So actually, Emma, the nurse, kept Libby more than anybody else, and we would be up in the big bedroom on the 2nd floor of 400 Bennett Street, and there would be Emma rocking the baby. And as she got older, it was like, here, Mary Gladys, can you play with the baby? But then it got where I was going to the movies or something with my friends, and I would be about 13 or 14, and Emma would tell Libby, says, "Hurry, they're leaving you, go to the movie." And I'd have to take this 2 or 3-year-old little girl to the movie with me, but she was amazing and really pretty, and in a way kind of fun. I know when I would be dating some of my prize boyfriends, we'd be out on the porch talking, and Libby would stroll up like nothing was important and spit in his face. And there wasn't anything Mother would do to her, never. She could do anything she wanted to, but Mother had her job and other things to worry about, so Libby was not her concern. But Margaret and I would double date with these boys from Donaldson Air Force Base, and we looked so much alike that if it didn't suit me to date, she could go in my place. They didn't know the difference. But she was a wonderful sister. We didn't have lunch money, so Mother wrote an excuse for Margaret and me to get out early at 1 o'clock because we had to come home for lunch or do some excuse. So they let us get out. And we would walk by Lipscomb Russell, where Mother was working then, and ask her for 10 cents each, and we'd go to the movie. We got out of school early to go to the movie. And we walked home. I walked from Bennett Street to Greenville High many a time. Mother, she was wonderful and tough and wanted us to have a good time. There were times that she'd take a whole paycheck after she went to work, Social Security Board or something, and give it to us to buy evening dress or whatever we needed for the dances. And of course, everybody loved her, and my home was open to people. My grandfather came and lived with us, and he was sitting on the couch all the time, just sitting there, white shirt and black suit, sitting. And it was my duty to talk to Papa. Mother had to go to work, 1937, and she came home tired, and would you talk to Papa? So Papa and I sat in and did crossword puzzles. And I told him, I said, "You don't miss a word." "Oh, well, I memorized the dictionary," that sort of thing. And he was just unusual. He got up every morning, got the newspaper, read the newspaper, and sat on the couch. And he and I would talk, this, that, and the other. Well, I think I told David this, but there was a cheerleader, most popular boy, best handsome boy. Everybody voted him for all these superlatives, and I had a date with him. Well, he came over all full with the energy of the cheerleader and bouncing all around, and Papa got up and kicked him in the butt. And I said, "Oh, Papa, what are you doing?" But that was my Papa. First husband was Leon Johnson, and he played football for Furman, handsome and hero type person, so forth. And I had been over to Clemson, and it was a fascinating thing because they wanted me to go on the stage and get the taps because my picture was in the yearbook. So I did that and spent the night, and then the next morning, there was Leon. He came over. He didn't have any business over there, and so he came over and knocked everybody else out from Dayton. And that was sort of the way he did things. I know he joined the Marines, and we had Mary Jane, and I was living over at Mother's house, and he wrote me a letter while I was pregnant, and said that, in essence, that socially my family was so above his family that he thought it'd be better to get a divorce. And Mother didn't like that at all, telling a pregnant woman you're gonna get a divorce. So she never liked him and wasn't gonna have anything to do with him. And Mary Jane was never gonna live with him. Well, number one, I'll tell you, Mother never mentioned labor. I had no anesthetic, anything. And Mary Jane, she was born, and I remember calling Mother, and Mother said she'll never forget it. She's gone now, but she said, I heard you, yeah. And I had this beautiful little baby with these big old eyes beside me. And the next morning they brought this little skinny boy up there. I said, no, that's not mine. And so his mother's name was Gladys Johnson too. And at this point, I wasn't in a position to say good things about Leon, but there was nothing wrong with him. He's a good man, and he loved me and I loved him, but I had nowhere to go. He was in Atlanta, in the Marines, kind of, and no money or anything and nowhere. So I just had to do what Mother said. And I stayed with her, and of course she gets attached to Mary Jane and loved her so much. It was so wonderful for her. Taught her everything, taught her to read by she was 2 or 3 years old. And Mother and Mary Jane were so wonderful. And that's kind of where she grew up a little bit. And needless to say, I grew way up. But I was surrounded by so much love. Of course, I went back over to Bennett Street, the house I grew up in. Leon was in the Marines at Emory University. And I just really and truly I wasn't used to him being there. So I enjoyed her by herself. And then my sister had a little child like a couple of years later, a little girl, and she lived with her husband over there. And it was just kind of fun. And of course, Emma was there still. I don't know how we were paying her or anything, but she was there and helped, with the cooking and that sort of thing. I went to Florida. She was still in the crib, in her bed, with the sides up and down and everything. And I went to Florida back then you couldn't get a divorce in South Carolina. So Mother sent me down to Miami to this alcoholic aunt, Lord. And I went through that and came home, and I hadn't seen her over a month and a half or something like that. And I walked in the bedroom, and she leaps up and just does her little hands out, to come get her. I'll never forget it, because she hadn't forgotten me. And she was always a good child. Mary Jane was 1944. Bo, 1947. John, 1949. Lee, 1955. So Mary Jane enjoyed them. They teased her a lot. She would go out to make a tent here in the backyard. Over a clothesline, she'd have a sheet and have a tent under there. And they would jerk the tent down. So she took off after one of them and they grabbed her hair, and she fell, and they were pulling her around by her hair, and I had to go stop that. But thinking about this house, Bo put a sheet on and jumped off the back porch because he was Superman. He was going to fly, and I don't know if he broke his arm or what, but he damaged something. He must have been 5th or 6th grade, somewhere around there. It took him a while to do things. He was watching the old washing machine go under the house, and it went round and round and round, and then it stopped, and you took the clothes and you ran it through a wringer. Well, it had stopped, so he took the clothes and ran it through the wringer, and his hand went in the wringer, and it went all the way up to the elbow, and turned, and finally I jerked it loose. No, wait, I didn't jerk it loose right away because I had to run him back out. And each joint would jump, stretch. It was awful. He was always athletic and wanted everybody to be doing things, and John was quieter and doing just as much, but in another way. He had a friend, you may know Johnny Dennis, I don't know. Johnny Dennis's brother Bill was his best friend, and I had picked him up at Edisto Island and brought him home, and as we rode in the driveway, Jimmy Alexander comes down and says, John, Bill's dead. And I had to go speak to Carolyn, his mother, so I got in the tub to bathe and get dressed so I could go see Carolyn. And John came in the bathroom and said, Mama, don't worry about me. I'll get over it. And I'll never forget it. I just looked at this little boy, and his heart was broken, but he didn't want to worry me. And he's been that way. He kind of, is very protective, and I've watched his girlfriends and, of course, Barbara, thinking, is it too much? Are they a little bit jealous of me or whatever? But if they are, I haven't seen it. Where Lee lives now, off of Ferris Ridge, that was the first place after I married, we moved back to Greenville, that I lived. And had Bo and Johnny and Mary Jane over there. But Mary Jane would walk from there all the way over to Augusta Circle School every morning by herself. She was amazing, even as a little girl, It was just kind of, I don't know a child that I know that had that. And I'll never forget, Dootsy Heyman and I would wait for Doug and Mary Jane to come out of first grade, and she came out one day with the Bible. And she said, what you got the Bible for, Mary Jane? And she said, well, I had the devotional. I said, you did? I said, yes. You want me to read something to you from Deuteronomy? In the first grade, she could read, and of course, Bo and Johnny were wonderful too. Along comes Lee. Lee and Tom Ramseur tore the first grade up, took the latest sandwich, undid it, and put sand or paper or something in it, and she eventually got sent to the office, and I know for the first half year, she counted lunch money with the principal in the office every day. That was her job. She was born, and one of her little feet turned the wrong way, so we turned the foot the right way, and we did that, it bowed her leg. So then we had to put some kind of slats or something, cast maybe, on her leg, twist that around. She's just been amazing, the things that she's done, and lives by herself and checks with me every day. Maybe the other children won't call me for a week, but I think they're busy. I'm not sure what they're doing. Well, I moved into this house, it must have been about 1950. My father-in-law, I called him Big Jimmy, Cal Mees, watched every nail. He saw to it I had baseboards the right 6 inches, picture frame around the top of the house. And the only thing that bothered him was when they poured the porch, it rained, so the porch dipped a little bit. But he saw to the plastering, and I mean, he just was such a wonderful person. And I remember him sitting down in the hot sun, putting the Charleston bricks lining the driveway, and I was going to go out and hang some clothes, and I took him a lemonade, and he just looks up at me, "I wish I had married somebody like you." And I'll never forget that too. So Mary Jane fit in, but she never really liked him. He was an alcoholic, spoiled rotten, and just say anything he wanted to say. And of course, when he was drinking, he was unbelievable. It was just like, stay out of his way. In fact, he told a friend of his, after we'd been married a good while, he says, "You know, she never raised her voice. She never said anything was wrong. And then all of a sudden, wham, I get a divorce." So that's the way I do things, I think. Kind of like my late husband George said, I was devious. So however you want to do that, it's a way of getting along. Well, George was just a gift. He really was. He told me, he says, well, I was working at the bank, and he was calling from Atlanta and said he's going to be there for lunch. Could he take me to lunch? And, oh, yeah, so I'd go to lunch. And then one day he said, well, you know, I don't know why you're still married. And I said, well, I'm not real happy with it at all. And he says, well, I've just always loved you, so how about we get married? I said, wait a minute. How do you mean you always loved me? He says, well, my first wife, Betty, was a close friend of yours, and we were going to get married, and they were having a party for me, for us. And I was there in the room, and everybody came. Nobody talked to me. Everybody was talking to Betty, the Beatties and the Smiths and all of those. And you saw me standing over there, so you just came over to talk. And I said, yeah, I kind of remember that, but he said, I just loved you then. But another thing that happened was he had a nerve that they were going to operate, went down the side of his neck. And they did that, but they cut another nerve in his vocal cords, and he couldn't speak where people understood him. But for some reason, I understood everything he said. So he would take me to the board meetings and tell me what to tell them. I was real proud of that. So. But he was so kind and so good to Lee, and wanted to be sure that she had what she needed, and kind of told me what to do. But it was a good life. It really was. I'm glad in a way that it wasn't all that easy for me, because I certainly have compassion for people that are not having it that easy.